Hello, welcome everyone to this week's episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Oke Müller. Oke, how are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing just about fine. Thank you so much. Busy days, but good spirits.
Yeah, it's morning for you over there. For me, it's a little context. It's 4 p.m. Where are you based right now?
Yeah, I'm calling in from Los Angeles, California, and it is morning coffee time shortly after 8. Just coming out of a holiday weekend, so fairly refreshed.
I'm guessing the weather's quite nice there as well right now.
It is, yeah, it is definitely that time of year where that phrase of the endless summer starts clicking in, and where everybody
Mm.
starts mourning the incoming fall. The summer is going to go on here for about 2 more months. Yeah, and that's really really nice to have still have beach weekends in October and November.
Yeah, and to start wrapping up the summer. We're getting some good games that are coming out. With Star Wars Outlaws last week, I haven't played that yet. I'm behind on a few other games, so I'll get around to it a little later. Astrobot this week on Friday. I'm definitely gonna just jump on that because I
Ah,
loved the VR version. I love the tech demo ever since 2020 when the tech demo came out on PS4 or with the PS. I'm sorry, with the PS5. I was like, I really just want a whole game of this. I really want a whole game. And when they announced it, and I think like many other people, I was super excited. Like, are there any games that you just started or you're excited about?
yeah. I mean, it was an interesting gaming summer in that sense. Usually, I play a lot of social stuff, MP games online. Kind of comes with the job to a good degree. This was a bit of a I don't know a season of single player.
Mm.
It was quite interesting. I mean, I have all consoles, obviously, and but as you you grow into a snob at one point and ride a 4090 PC and as your main gaming device, and it was a blissful kind of couple of months of catching up or taking in. Ironically, now working for Microsoft, a lot of the Sony first party exclusives that came to PC. So I had a really nice time playing Horizon Zero Dawn, Forbidden West, Ghost of Tsushima, older games, but when they showed up on PC, they were showing in their full glory, and it was just really nice to play through some amazingly directed and created single player games. And then Elden Ring, Elden Ring showed up with the Shadows of the Earth Tree expansion, and that took over my life quite a bit. I keep forgetting how engaging the From Software games are, but what they've done with Elden Ring is just a whole different ball game. It's probably could be a whole podcast episode in itself. So I'll leave it on the shelf for now, although we could dive in later. And yeah, now I just started to dive into Outlaws as well to have a look. I want to try Black Myth Wukong for sure.
Oh yeah,
I
that as
mean,
well.
very interesting production for sure. The first big AAA game coming out of China, leaning into like folklore, like one of the most famous traditional Chinese novels, and showing up in the market. And then Outlaws, I'm big Star Wars fan. Grew up with it. Found my corners within that universe that I appreciate, and I think the lovable scoundrel archetype is definitely one of my favorites in the Star Wars world. So started to get my feet wet there with playing KVS in that universe between Empire and Jedi, and yeah, I do quite like it. It's interesting. It's definitely it's almost hard these days sometimes to embrace a game for just what it is, especially when you work in the industry, because you look at a lot of data around a lot of games, but the disc you almost need to turn off the internet if you really want to enjoy a game these days. Maybe just turn off the internet 2 weeks before it comes out. Could be helpful. Anyways,
Oh
but
yeah.
yeah, those are the games. Looking forward to the next Assassin's Creed installment, and then on the PC side, weirdly, it's going to be my first in the 40K universe, but I am looking for Space Marine 2, which all my Elden Ring infested coworkers recommended as the next big co-op thing that we should all try. So it's kind of the repertoire at the moment, and then obviously once we launch Black Ops 6, it's going to be Black Ops 6 for many, many weeks. All my friends are already in the trenches, ready to get back in with Treyarch's new game, and that's what I'm really looking forward to. It's the bit basically Call of Duty every year is it's always a big work thing, but also a great friend reunion because everybody comes back to play. So yeah, that's kind of my roster for the foreseeable months.
Okay, and you mentioned Outlaws. I mentioned that. You expanded on it. What platform are you playing that on, and how have you found the performance? Because obviously there's been that little bit around the performance and a few other aspects of it as well.
It's uh, as mentioned, I became quite a PC snob, and I play these type of games on a 4090, but I piped them into not into a monitor, but through HDMI 2.1 into a 4K 120 hertz. One of these OLEDs, these LG OLEDs, they're just fantastic. So I play it through a PC, and it runs really well. It's actually quite incredible. It's a beautiful world, especially the cities. The open world's a bit choppy around the edges. I hope they will optimize that. But yeah, no, overall, I'm pretty smitten by the performance. Yeah, the gameplay, probably needs to unpack itself a little bit, running around, having a little blaster, and but overall it feels really good to be in the world. I think they did a really good job on sound design, on all the ambient npc conversations. It immerses you. Weirdly, I was in Disneyland a week ago, and it had I think it to me it feels more like walking through Galaxy's Edge, that Disneyland park, that Star Wars Disneyland park out here in Anaheim, versus to the actual Star Wars universe. But I'll take it. It's a Star Wars theme park. I think that's how I would describe Outlaws at this point. I like the two main characters. They're cool. I like the idea of playing one of these behind the scenes campaigns that reminds me a little bit more of Andor than other recent Star Wars installments. So yeah, I think I'm going to have a good time with it. And I'm going to avoid the discourse around the game because it's just a little depressing sometimes.
Yeah, it can be, and it's it's one of those things where the game might not be the best once it comes out, but for some players that wait, let's say 3, 6, or even 12 months, then their experience is totally different, and
Yeah.
it's it's good that they work on those games and improve them post launch. But then for the people that buy it straight away and let's say push through it but don't want to necessarily come back, it can be a bit disappointing because they
Oh, yeah.
might have played a broken game compared to what it ultimately became.
Yeah.
Because games like Cyberpunk as well, I know that at launch compared to what it is now is totally different. And I know a couple of people that played it at launch, played it a fair bit, didn't complete it, or play some fair few hours, and they was like, yeah, I just don't want to go back, even though the
Yeah.
experience is a lot better now. And like you lose some gamers as a result, and I feel like it's a few gamers just go away without fully experiencing what it could be as well.
Yeah. It's difficult. I mean, you need to launch at one point, and it's a hard battle to win sometimes because you cannot just keep postponing your launch. Although some games probably should give them a little bit more time. You got to get out, and even with all of the best preparations and all the QA you can throw at it, a big launch is a big launch, and a game changes when you evolve from play testing it with internal or external players, when you beta test it, and then you release it into the wild. And it it is just if millions of players descend on a game at the same time, there is just a lot of stress on every single system. They will find bugs, they will stumble into bugs, hopefully not too many, but it's really hard to avoid. And speaking coming from a company that launches a big game every year, launching on time is an incredible challenge, but it's also incredibly important. And the game may need the day one patch to cut through it and get everything done. And that's why sometimes to your point about players coming in early and being disappointed. That's why you got to be really mindful whether you want to do this early access thing, especially for your highest paying customers. I think Outlaws sold a $120 edition that got you 3 days early, and then people were asked to kind of restart because there was a game breaking bug in their save file. So it's a difficult trade off sometimes. To launch on time and in one piece. I think you need to curate as much as you can, and then ideally bring it out for everybody at the same time. Early access can be quite tricky, as Outlaws has shown them once again. Yeah,
Yeah, and also, single player. I feel like every so often, single player gets a boost. You get a bunch of games that come out, and some of them great. Sort of revitalizing that single player, especially if they don't really have any multiplayer aspect or any major multiplayer aspect to it as well. So it's just pure single player, and that's all you're buying. What's your take on it? Because you got so many titles that used to have a big single player component that have gone away from it, or the focus has become so much multiplayer. And we know why. It's there's so much money to be made on multiplayer compared to single player, but there's still that market for those single player experiences,
yeah,
especially for the older people like us. The younger kids, I mean, I don't know. It's something I would love to think I'm wrong about, but just from my experience, speaking to family members that are younger, it's not like there's no single player experiences out there. There's the Uncharted of the world, there's The Last of Us, there's Star Wars Jedi Survivor, all these sort of games. So they're out there, and they're playing Fortnite. They're playing
yeah,
Roblox if they're a little younger. They're playing Minecraft. They're playing Call of Duty Warzone or whatever. And it's
yeah.
like it's not like there's zero single player games. They're still there, but they're still choosing. Obviously, part of it is because that's what they've grown up with, and that's what the YouTubers are playing. They're rock stars, and that's what they want to play. So like, what's your take on the state of single player?
Yeah, that's a really really great question, and I think single player will never really go away. It it is maybe a shrinking market, so it will see maybe a little less investment than it used to. But I mean, from our and this is kind of where I can start to lean into a little bit of the job I'm doing from the research we do. We know on the one hand how important the single player is in general. Full stop. People when you talk to people about the games that they loved most in their times as players. It very quickly comes down to the single player epics. It's your Witchers, it's your even GTA's. The stories are important. It's your Last of Us, the ones you mentioned, right? So I think there's always a desire for a single player narrative experience, and um, of course, you're absolutely right that the business has moved way more into a live service game that is driven by the social dynamics of multiplayer games, whether it's PvE, PvP, PvEVP, of course, more of a niche these days. But that's where a lot of the action is because people, and the pandemic played a part in it, use these platforms to come together. And I think, honestly, that's part of the beauty of gaming, that people through these multiplayer games found a space to hang out, especially during the pandemic when everybody was locked up. And I think there was quite a tectonic shift in the scene to move people more into social experience and gaming. We see a lot of trends moving towards that. Talking to parents these days, you realize, oh, they'd rather have them play a video game with their friends than use Instagram with strangers, or just the social pressure that creates. So a lot of social dynamics drive this new evolution of gaming. But I'd argue that even in those games, and this leans into another point I want to make, even though you don't have a beginning, middle, end, 3-act single player story, although some of the new live service games actually come with that, but I think a lot of the free to play or even pay to play multiplayer games out there, they deliver a story when they're good. They deliver a story in different ways. I think the Hoyoverse, all these very anime-driven game titles like Genshin Impact, ZZZ that just came out, Honkai Star Rail, they tell stories in different ways. They're more bite-sized. It could be a character lore and the character's relation to the world that is that bite-sized form of storytelling that an incoming generation still appreciates, but maybe doesn't need that 20, 30, 40 hour main quest single player epic that maybe the older generation prefers. So I think storytelling is there in these new forms of multiplayer games. Sometimes they're better, sometimes they're not that good. I think, Concord just tried that quite in an interesting way. I thought it didn't land as well as they hoped, I want to say. But everybody's trying to find that balance. How do we enter that multiplayer space where the business is heading, while still satisfying that need for, and we call it the need for immersion. Just a mechanical model for people to have a gameplay experience is usually not cutting it. I'd say X Defiant was an interesting example there. But having that narrative context that immerses you into the world makes even the multiplayer experience more desirable. And Call of Duty is kind of that, kind of trying to do it all every year. We have a single player campaign, and single player campaign is really quite important for us. We know that a really significant amount of our players, the annual habitual players, they even buy a Call of Duty game for the campaign. They have their fun with it. They maybe play it once, maybe play it twice, then spend 10, 20 hours in multiplayer. And that's the value they get out of the game, while others obviously go straight to multiplayer and then spend months on end with it. But I think narrative context in games in general is very important, and we know that from our studies. But the single player epics, they will be probably a little bit less of. I think we see gonna see a lot of interesting narrative games show up in indie games, because a lot of the storytellers who maybe have moved on from AAA studios, who don't get the same levels of funding at this moment for big AAA single player games like the new Assassin's Creed. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting narrative stuff popping up in the indie world, and it's already quite significant. That will feed that need to have a great story, like a Life is Strange or smaller games that really tell amazing stories, maybe in a more bite-sized format, versus your traditional AAA Assassin's Creed 70-hour mainline games. They will exist, but I think you're right. It will be a little less so than, let's say, 10 years ago.
Oh yeah, and these single play these single play experiences, even though you don't immediately think of mobile games as single play experiences, let's say like the Angry Birds or the Flappy Birds, they are single player experiences. Like obviously, when we say single player games, we are thinking of the Star Wars Outlaws,
Yeah.
the Uncharted, the Half Lives, the Halo, like these games. But I guess in strict definition, flapping around on Flappy Bird is a single player
Yeah.
experience, and they're predominantly single player. There's some like leaderboard, or there was, when the game was still up. But
Yeah.
like you said, developers have either migrated from working on the bigger titles or trying to make those bigger titles, or the new set of developers that are coming in, they're like, okay, I don't want to work on Call of Duty or Battlefield multiplayer, and that's the main focus. That's not what I want. I want to do a single player experience. Oh, and I also like the idea that I can do it with one or two other friends and potentially make same, if not more money. Again, potentially, it's not as simple as just put the game out there, it just does well.
Yeah.
But the possibilities there, and not be constrained in the same way. So yeah, doing that sort of indie style, it's definitely there. And like you say, you're seeing it with all sorts of games, whether it is like the Telltale games, like Life is Strange,
Yeah.
Journey, those other games where some of them are from the bigger studios, and that reflects in in the quality. But yeah, they're not on the size of an Uncharted or a Grand Theft Auto, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
They are still constrained, usually probably in the length of the game, the scale of the game, and what they're trying to touch on as well. But again, they are single player experiences. What I'm interested in, and I we'll segue into this before we go into what you're doing
Yeah.
over at Activision, is portable PC gaming. So Steam Deck,
Mm.
ROG Ally. I've just got my ROG Ally X. Just slowly
Oh,
installing stuff on
nice.
that. So I'm excited to play stuff like Red Dead Redemption. 2 on that. I've played it before, but I've been wanting to play it again. That I can get 60 frames per second on that, so I can get a really great experience
Nice.
that I can't on something like the Steam Deck. But those sort of platforms, I feel like they're so suited for some sort of single player experience, on the train, or just, in the corner on the couch, or maybe in your hotel room, and you just want a
Yeah.
single player experience. And obviously, part of it is going back and playing the old game because they still look pretty good on that small screen and they perform well. And part of it might be some newer titles where, yeah, the developers know that, okay, this is probably going to be played on some sort of handheld like a Switch or a ROG Ally Steam Deck or some other equivalent, and that's going to be the main mode of play. Have you looked much into these sort of portable
Yeah.
PCs?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, it is still a smaller growing market, but it's definitely a force to be reckoned with. And I mean, I really adore my Steam Deck. It's a fantastic product, and it's going to be an interesting journey when these type of handhelds. I mean, not also the Switch obviously has established a whole understanding for a new type of mobile gaming, and it's really quite interesting because these devices, even though portable, seem to scratch a very different gaming need state than actual mobile games. It's the divide, and you mentioned mobile games earlier as single player experiences. Yep, sure, a Candy Crush on the train is technically a single player experience, although there's a lot of social dynamics going on. I'm always quite fascinated to realize how many layered social and clan systems they bake into mobile games these days. And I'm in my research, I find very often that as we create titles like Call of Duty Mobile and Warzone Mobile, how different the need state is of an actual mobile phone gamer versus a gamer on the go that plays with who plays with a Steam Deck or an Ally ROG. And I think the fascination, how much power shows up in these handheld consoles, is having a big draw. And I do agree with you that this might actually establish almost a different gaming culture on the go, where you maybe play a quest in The Witcher 3 because it looks incredible on an Ally ROG and the remastered version. You maybe go on a quest in The Witcher versus knocking out some stuff in Clash of Clans or Candy Crush and so on. So it definitely is a market, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens when the tech gets better. I have a Steam Deck One, which is still doing. I'm able to play Elden Ring on this thing. It's incredible. It's 30 frames, but it looks pretty neat. 40 frames maybe, but I think it's a market. We'll see how big it will be. I think we'll see a lot of entry efforts into this market. Steam will probably reign supreme there to a degree because the integration of Steam OS and the access to your backlog is just such a draw. And I think others will jump on it as well. I think ROG Ally will have a place in there. God knows who else will jump into the scene, but that's definitely a market that we have a very close eye on. We still, for Call of Duty, we're still wrestling with some anti-cheat implementations there. So no Steam Deck for COD players just yet. But yeah, it's definitely a market. People are more and more on the go. People live in smaller spaces. Unfortunately, that's where the world is heading. Maybe they can't afford a nice TV and a 4090, but an Ally ROG gives them access to their backlog. And I think that's another thing in this whole equation is that um, people are just sitting on so many games since everything went digital. People sitting on really deep libraries. I mean, the Steam backlog became a meme in itself, and I think from my own experience as well, to have access to my whole backlog of PC games that actually like a 5 to 10 year old game looks stunning on even a Steam Deck One. I think that's a big appeal as well, that you can scoop up games for lower prices in sales or sit on the backlog and then munch away at that because maybe you don't have the money to play $120 for Star Wars Outlaws Premium Edition. So definitely a market. Um, we'll see a lot of entries, and then it'll probably whittle down, as it always does, to the 2, 3 who kind of have a, you know, compelling proposition, but definitely a market.
Oh yeah, and I agree. I think Valve, and obviously with Steam, whether it's the Steam OS or Steam, digital platform where they're obviously distributing the games, or the Steam Deck, is gonna be a big player in the future. I wouldn't be surprised if 5 or so years, one of the legitimate systems that game again, it's still pretty enthusiast, I would say right now. Still,
Yeah,
you know, PC gamers that are kind of buying them. I haven't seen any statistics, but I would hazard a guess that majority of definitely the other one like the ROG Alloys, but like the Steam Deck, I'll say the majority of the people that are buying it were probably pretty hardcore PC gamers. Anyway,
yeah,
I doubt any of them because, like I said, it just makes sense. They've got that Steam library. They've got
exactly.
potentially hundreds and hundreds, and maybe the Humble Bundle and everything. And now it just feels like, oh my god, I can access all these games. Like I said, I've been playing Max Payne 3 on my Steam Deck. Still
Me
looks great.
too. It's so funny that you say that. It was one of the first games I put on
I
there
know.
and played on a plane. Yeah, exactly. Max
Yeah,
Payne 3. I don't know why I went there right away.
and the thing is, it's got that. It's got enough. Like, obviously, the other ones have more power, but like Steam Deck has enough power at a price point where you can play a 10 or so year old game, which still feels kind of like a modern game. Because if you try and
Yeah,
play a game from the '90s, there's a retro aspect to it, but you don't feel like it's a modern game. You
yeah,
play, obviously a GTA 5 or like a Max Payne 3, and you're like, this could potentially pass off as a modern game just in terms of the gameplay mechanics
yeah,
and what you're doing and the scale of things. And then you whack in on pretty much max resolution, max settings on your Steam Deck, looks fantastic, and you're
yeah,
running around, you're playing that. But what I think is going to be interesting is a lot of people that were playing single player games, especially like their Steam library prior to these portable systems, were playing them on the PC, obviously maybe
yeah,
connected up to a TV and maybe had some sort of home theater PC as well. I know Steam tried that with their what the Steam boxes, a few years back, and
yeah,
that didn't really pan out. But either way, it was in the home. You had the
yeah.
home internet as well. But now you might get somebody in a remote location, maybe, let's say for work, or maybe they've, gone on holiday and they've gone for 3 weeks, and, they might not have the best, access to internet, and they don't want to obviously take a PlayStation with them. They don't want to, either take or try and get hold of a TV, then HDMI cables, etc., etc. All they need is their console,
Is
potentially
exactly
might
that.
even be able to charge using their laptop or phone charger, so they might not even have to take an extra charger as well, which is also very appealing for them, especially if they've just got a backpack and they're just backpacking around Europe. They could have their offline library. But what's interesting to me is right now there's a lot of single player games, even slightly older ones, that require some sort of connectivity, even if it's just connection
Mm,
after a week or two, or whether it's consistent connection, or something that it doesn't technically require connection because you're not playing online like Call of
yeah,
Duty Warzone. Obviously that needs online connection, nobody's saying it doesn't, but playing so say an older Call of Duty or whatever it is, uh, I feel like there might become a resurgence of that sort of movement and of that sort of conversation that single player games should
should be
not
offline.
require, an online connection, or,
And
very minimal.
I totally agree, and I think there's I think it will be then up to the platform of the handhelds to, force the hand of the software people a little bit, and that's also the appealing part of diving into your backlog. And Max Payne 3 is an excellent example. There's other games that are such just so forgotten in a way, but have such an opportunity to come back and shine in their like offline nature. I don't know. The another one is Vanquished. Is like this ridiculous third person shooter game from way back when Sega published it. There's a lot of games that look. The funny thing about those decks is, or those handhelds is, you often have this thing of you remember a game a certain way, the way it looked, the way it feels. But then when you boot it up, I don't know, a 360 game, or I don't know, a PlayStation 3 game, an older PC game on your modern hardware, it never quite looks as you remember it. But for some reason, the Steam Deck, because it's a smaller form factor, the graphics are a little bit more compressed on that smaller screen. I have a feeling that older games feel like you remember them on this smaller form factor versus playing them on a big screen. So it kind of pulls you in. And then the other thing I wanted to say about the single player things, yes, I agree there should be offline modes, but I think even modern games solve it pretty well. Even Elden Ring, who's technically an online game that wants you to connect to be part of their shared world, but very clearly when you go in offline mode on Steam, it lets you play it, it's all fine, you'll upload your save to the cloud when you connect back, and it's all good. So I think there are definitely modern games that solve it, but the older games definitely not required, which is refreshing and nice. And also two older games as outside of the online offline question, it's like sometimes you play an older game, especially some of the greats like the Witchers and the Max Paynes and whatever, and they're so well done. There is you realize that old doesn't mean bad at all. They're games that are epic narratives that have kind of really cool ideas. Some of them you don't see much anymore, like Max Payne's like slow motion effect and stuff like that. And I think it is really nice that people now have easy access to that recent history of gaming, because and maybe there's a little bit of an inflection point with the pandemic when everything went to work from home and production processes got disrupted and changed a little bit. And sometimes, maybe it's just an old fart talking, but it's this question of, man, they don't used to, they don't make them like they used to. It's this feeling of grabbing an older game and realizing, oh goodness, this is an excellent video game. It has excellent ideas, technology, narrative, systems, whatever. And it's just really nice to have access to that again. And if $120 new release doesn't scratch your itch, maybe dive into your catalog on a Steam Deck and have a really good time. I think that option, just having that option, is fantastic.
Oh yeah, and I think what we might actually see is not just remasters and remakes of games where the developers, to some extent, are
Yeah.
putting effort into bringing that experience back and then marketing it again. They might actually literally start promoting and marketing old games that are on Steam Deck, like you said, for 5, 10
Sorry, I
pounds.
lost you there.
Yeah, no, I was just saying, publishers and developers might actually start, promoting and marketing old games, not in the form of a remaster or a remake, but just saying, we've got this old Call of Duty, it's not remade or remastered, but you can experience it again, not on PlayStation, not on, Switch, but on your Steam Deck. And
Yeah.
you can go and buy it, and we're going to give you a limited time, sale. If you don't want to go and buy, like you said, the $80 to $120, or the latest greatest Call of Duty, go and buy the one that's $20 from 10 years ago, which
Yeah.
is renowned for the single player experience, and
Yep.
happens to not really have much of sort of restrictions around single player and having requiring online, and it's also not that big in terms of file size. It's not like the 200 gig or whatever Call of Duties are nowadays, and many other games. So I haven't seen that yet, but I feel like that might be a very real thing that developers might start marketing old
It's
games for, because they're already there. They're not
it's
doing any
it,
new deal to get them on a platform. They're
yeah.
not, remaking a game. It's just a bit of marketing. So if they could get that money back, at least it's I guess worth it for them. And so and I feel like they would, especially with, so like you said, the greats.
Yeah.
Like the Half Lives, the the Max Paynes, the old Call of Duties. Again, I'm slowly going through my old titles. I'm excited to go through the old Call of Duties, that I remember playing. Black Ops 1, I've already started on my Steam Deck. Black Ops 2, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, but not the remaster, the
Yeah.
original, because it's not, actually, no, it's, the remake, not the remake, because even though that obviously borrows a lot of elements from the original, it is still a new game.
Yeah.
There are still changes to the storyline, the characters, them obviously the whole new levels. Obviously, I know you had the remaster, so either go and play the remaster or just the original. Because if I've already got it on my Steam library, or I can go and buy it, and I think that's a great possibility. Plus, also when there are games like Call of Duty World at War that may not have been remastered or remade yet, I'm like, that's fine. I'll just go and play it on my Steam Deck, max settings, and it'll still look
Yep.
decent.
I can tell you right now without knowing it. Someone's running the numbers on this as we speak.
Oh,
Because, I mean, I totally agree with you. It would be, but the basically the marketing platform for these kind of reactivations of older titles technically exists and made the Steam Deck happen. It's the Steam sales. It's that factor that a Steam publisher sale is just a glorious moment of snagging up games for, to your point, 20, 10, sometimes $7. You won't play them. I sometimes put them in the vault thinking about, hey, retirement is going to be a blast because I'm sitting on 900 video games and I haven't played 700 of them. So that's going to be fun. Yeah, it's the Steam sales are a big driver for that. But I agree with you because marketing is more than just an ad on a website or a TV commercial. Marketing means getting games ready for that, and once the scale is reached that justifies the investment to not just allow them to be there and be played like the older titles. By the way, great idea to pick up Black Ops 2 again. I want to play that campaign. Also, Infinite Warfare, I fired up recently on my Steam Deck, looks amazing. Um, so yeah, but getting them ready for it, getting them verified, adjusting the controls a little bit, all that kind of jazz.
that's
And
what I
to
would
the
like.
other point about single player, very often there is a bit of a risk involved to put an older multiplayer game out there in terms of what people do to exploit it, which is a big deal, obviously in all of tech and gaming. But yeah, it's actually also interesting pitch to make. Can just remaster a campaign and verify them for Steam Deck, not just remaster them, but just get them ready for Steam Deck. An interesting question, but yeah, definitely a lot of fun to be had with those platforms. I'm curious how it will collide with phone gaming. It's a very different category as mentioned, but I'd obviously be very, very happy if I see more people on a plane, on a plane or a train with their ROG Ally playing a vintage Call of Duty game versus some mobile game. Although they could play Candy Crush. So there we go. Anyways, but yeah, interesting future for handhelds. Really curious what Nintendo will show next, because they set the course for this market for the first time, and we'll see what their second entry will be, and then yeah, we'll see. I'm excited. I'm definitely want to look into this, into the allies and everything. I'm just so tied to the Steam ecosystem. I like closed ecosystems. I worked on Apple a long time, and I like the idea of everything just works. You don't have to worry about
Mm.
any kind of installers or running an operating system on a handheld computer. It's just like you turn it on, it works, and all your games are there. Uh, Steam Deck really nailed it there. How's that Ally ROG X experience? Is it native? Is it running Steam OS actually by this point?
No, no. I mean, there are versions of Linux that give you kind of like a Steam OS experience. I haven't got around to
Oh,
installing them. I'm going to check them out. They're meant to be, very good. But it just runs Windows 11. Like when you first turn it on,
ah,
the Windows 11 logo comes on, and it just takes you through basically the few like setup procedure or like, your country, setting up Wi-Fi. But you can tell it is in the Windows 11 interface. Then it takes you literally to the Windows 11 desktop. And what's a shame is I'm sure you remember back in Windows 8 that had that sort of, Metro tile interface, which was
yeah,
great
true.
for tablets. And then, like, I
Yeah,
think in 8.1, they removed it. And I was like, that is what you literally need on some sort of portable system, especially like this, instead of the Windows 11, desktop. But again, I think anyone that's buying the ROG Ally or the Lenovo or, one of these consoles, I think they know it's more enthusiast than the Steam Deck. Steam Deck is clearly trying to say, okay, you've got this library, you want to be a PC gamer, you want to take it on the go, but you kind of want that console experience. We'll kind of
yeah.
handle the drivers and the updates for the most part, behind the scenes. Games will be like verified as well. So, you can see, okay, that's got the green tick. I'm going to get great experience with that. The other ones you can experiment with. You can have different controller profiles as well to see, if you
Yeah.
can get a better experience with, let's say, an older game, for example, like Black Ops, it natively doesn't have the controls the way a new Call of Duty does, but using some sort of profile, without me having to do much customization, I can get a kind of a console-like experience. That's what Steam has done really well. And then they're saying, okay, we're going to sell you for pretty cheap as well the base model, and you can just whack in a micro SD card, and you're all good to go. So yeah, Rogue Ally, like I said, I only got it a few days ago.
Yeah.
I literally only got around to setting it up yesterday, slowly installing games. The thing I'm most excited about is the the titles that require a bit more juice. Trying them out, to trying some emulators as well, like PlayStation 3 emulator, Xbox
Oh
360
wow,
emulator,
yeah.
the Wii U, like to see, because I've done that on the Steam Deck. You can get some decent performance out of it, but really, I'd say beyond going PS2, it's you're not gonna get that much performance if you're trying to go PS3. But the videos I've seen of people playing like God of War 3 and like The Last of Us and Uncharted on the ROG Ally X, and
Mm.
I'm like, that's just amazing, to be able to see that. So I think that's going to be very interesting. You mentioned something like 5-10 minutes ago that again, I didn't know this. Did you say COD does not support Steam Deck, or did I hear it
Not its
correctly?
current multiplayer form. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
So what does that mean? Does that mean if I literally download COD onto my Steam Deck and I try and click multiplayer, it just won't play? Is that what it is?
Honestly, I think there's just a few select older titles even available for the Steam Deck. I haven't tried it in a while. I just was part of a conversation recently where
Okay.
we're not opening it up unthrottled at this point. I don't even know what the background issue is, but goodness, now I would need to check. Can I? No, I can't play COD multiplayer at the moment on a Steam Deck. But
Hmm.
there's a bunch of catalog titles where you can play the single player stuff for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, no. Again, I was just again like my mindset and my for thinking was always you can play pretty much anything on Steam Deck. Your mileage may vary in terms of performance, in terms of
Yeah.
how good it is, because obviously the form factor and developers might make it better for portable. But the fact again, I'll look into it because again that's interesting because the little bit of COD online that I play is on my PS5 anyway. So it's not something
Yeah.
I would have tried and come across, and I probably would stick to that. Some of the old single player experiences, I'll stick to a portable console definitely. Okay, so let's talk about what you do. You work for Activision. You're a VP
Yes.
of Global Player Insights. What does that mean?
Yeah. So I'm 8 years in with Activision. It was a bit of a career change for me. I came from the advertising world. We can get into that later, maybe. But yeah, I joined Activision 8 years ago. In the beginning, I was brought in as the head of franchise planning, which was a more strategic role. My career background is brand strategy in the marketing and advertising world, and they brought me in 2016 to have a look into primarily the Call of Duty franchise strategy. They were about to launch Infinite Warfare, and it was becoming clear that the journey to space was maybe a step too far into the future for some of the community. So my original task was to ground Call of Duty, the brand Call of Duty, in its kind of foundational values and what made it great originally, to set course for the titles we saw coming starting in 2019. It takes 3 years to make a game. So when you decide for a path that, we laid the foundation for Modern Warfare relaunch in 2019. We laid that in 2016, 2017, and then IW did a fantastic job doing that. Did a franchise strategy for 1 to 2 years roughly before we handed it over to the business strategy team to run in perpetuity, while I was also overseeing what was then called Consumer Insights. That was a research function of the company, which was largely focused on marketing research. We were doing a lot of marketing related focus groups, brand tracking, campaign tracking, etc. And that team reported into me from the beginning because the data was really, really helpful to shape the strategy. And then step by step and over time, I phased out of the strategy role as that was kind of done, and then took on more research responsibilities. And yeah, and about so started in 2016. Did the strategy development while building the consumer insights team, and then in 2018, 2019, we had a shift in leadership, and our new president, who was my direct manager in franchise planning, asked me to help ultimately become a bit more of a player first company. And in that whole strategic move, we basically relabeled our research efforts a little bit and refocused them to not just do the marketing research. We still do a lot of that, but open the aperture and become a more holistic department that takes in applies studies and research to the full life cycle of a product. So we were becoming much more focused on game development first and foremost, still very involved in marketing. And ultimately, the task was to take the key functions within the company, starting with development, always starting with development, and the business and the marketing and the retail and the consumer products and the whole cycle around the game, and make sure that we have research answers for all these key stakeholder groups to make sure that a point of view of our players is injected into all the decision making processes. So that was the task, and that was a really interesting, and I think I thought a very fulfilling mission, because overall we realized that it helped a lot. I mean, I think it gives the people, the developers, and the business a lot to hear from the players in the right moments, and it's not just from Reddit or from X or other social media. So that's what we did. It's a holistic research function that delivers the insights to the decision making processes. That's player insights at one side of the group. And then the other group that I took on in those 8 years, it's called user research. That's your place testing operations. It's not QA. That's a very different function. Those are employees testing the game for bugs and trying to get them all out before launch. User research is much more focused on developing multivariate studies in a lab environment to basically have our players play sometimes our earliest prototypes, sometimes blocked out maps, sometimes the full campaign of a Call of Duty game over 3 days and 3 sittings to really provide live granular feedback to our developers so they understand how each element of the game works and how it's performing, and how it's received and where there's room for optimization, what works and what can be done better. And yeah, that's a very interesting function. Most publishers or studios have it. It's about 30 people alone in user research. We operate a playtest facility that we literally just finalized last year. We had another one in our old headquarters that we gave up during the pandemic. And then we're improvising a little bit. Last year, we built a whole new user research center here in the Los Angeles area. And it's cool. It's like every week there's 3, 4, 5, 6 studies where we recruit external players in. We have really nice kind of, you would geek out over that. It's like basically at least is 3 big labs, 24 seats each. The latest development kits of the newest consoles and 4090 PCs under every desk, and really interesting ways to take in the data when people play, whether it's eye tracking or controller mapping, to have as much data points as possible to help our developers understand how our players are looking at their game, playing their game, to then base decisions on that as well. So, yeah, those are the 2 areas. One, player insights, more focused on ethnography, focus groups, global quantitative survey based studies. And then the other group is user research, that basically is our first line of defense, where players, external players, get hands on with our products for the first time. So yeah, that's roughly my world. It's maybe put more context around it. Um, There's it's not analytics. There's another big group within the company that takes in all the real-time data from the game, from our servers, to then analyze them on their behavior to really understand what people are doing in the game. That's a whole other group as well. We're really actually in touch with players. We invite them to focus groups. We send them surveys. We invite them to the labs, and yeah, we're really trying to be the people who talk to people in a way, and really make sure that we don't understand just what they do in the game, what levels they play, how much they win, die, lose, spend money, but also why they play. We want to illuminate what works. Why is zombies so interesting? What is the alchemy of Call of Duty multiplayer to inform something like Omni movement, or what works in a single player narrative? What characters are strong? Where do we need some work? Maybe we can up the ante a little bit on the narrative design to make sure that people find the best possible immersion in the game. So we understand why they play, what motivates them, and then their likes and dislikes. I think hopefully in a nutshell that explains what it is. Every time I talk about it is A, pinch me, this is awesome, how am I doing this? And B, it is obviously a lot to take in and understand. But ultimately, yeah, we talk to a lot of players and bring their voices to the table wherever we can.
Okay, like how was it going into you know the world of video games? Because clearly you're a fan of video games, so that's been a big part of your life. But before, like you said, you was working in ad agencies. Like, what were those ad agencies? Like, what were they doing? Were they doing ads for games? So you was kind of already in that world, but not directly part of a studio like Activision, or was it ads for big tobacco? I'm just thinking of Mad Men.
Yeah. It's a good question. It's kind of the whole narrative is kind of intertwined between the career path and the personal passion for gaming. But reflecting on the advertising part, it's basically in advertising, there's a role called the planner, which is really,
It
it's
sounds
like
like this like next year's action movie starring
yeah,
Liam Neeson or Jason Statham, The Planner.
the planner. I
Yeah.
acquired a certain set of skills. Yeah, it's a funny one because it's nebulous, because people often think like, oh, the planner. You make the plan. Show me the calendar. It's like, okay. It's ultimately, I think the more appropriate term is actually brand strategist or communication strategist or whatever you want to call it. We're actually pretty bad at planning actual things. It is more making a conceptual vision, a strategic vision of sorts, that a North Star, if you like, that helps, especially creative people, to unleash their firepower in the right direction. And in advertising, it is it's almost comparable role to what I do today, because in that role in the advertising world, the strategist ultimately, you obviously work on a brief, you're an agency, so you always work for a client in that sense. But what you do is you ultimately take in all the available information about the business, the market, and mainly the consumer in that case, or the people who are supposed to buy your product, the people you're trying to attract to buy your product. And you take in all that data, map it against the client brief, and then identify a path almost for creative people to um, give them what is it called, the freedom in a framework. You provide a framework for creativity. You don't want to limit creativity. You want to help them to identify a direction where their ideas can go. It's basically you identify the insights that consumers that you can gain about consumers in this industry. What do they like? What do they dislike? What is some a common thought about an industry that you can disrupt with an idea? I worked at agencies that were very focused on disrupting the status quo, which I always thought very interesting, because just playing within convention is, to me, just personally a little bit boring. So in a lot of the agencies that I worked at, and I can go into some of those in a second, the mission was always to stand out as a brand. So a lot of the work is really identifying what people think about a category, what they don't like, and then offer something that is slightly different. Apple being a great example. with the Think Different campaign from back then, or Sony, even Sony's early PlayStation work. I was part of that in Europe. Um, was really interesting because it was trying to set itself apart. Sony was always trying to disrupt in its early days to disrupt the status quo, which was video games are for kids. And back in the days, the agency I worked for in Europe, TBWA, launched to me, still my favorite gaming ad ever made, the PlayStation ad called Double Life, that ultimately brought gaming based on the insight that a lot more people from all walks of life are playing video games and not just kids and the Nintendos, was this idea that it is a life enriching experience to play video games because it provides you these life experiences outside of your day-to-day life. And I thought that was kind of one of these strategic things that literally came out of research, where people reflected on their experience with gaming being less about kiddie fun fun, but about really profound life experiences that they have in a video game. And it was the time when PlayStation obviously brought 3D gaming and realistic-ish gaming to a mass market. And a strategist would always look at that and think, okay, how can I make my product, my brand stand out in a meaningful way? Sony did that very effectively. Apple did it. And the company I worked for a long time, TBWA Chiat Day, it's a global ad firm, ad agency, that was their kind of credo: disruption. How do you break the status quo? And it was always quite interesting to think about strategy like that. So that's what a brand strategy does. That's what I did for a long time, and it translated pretty okay. Corporate world is a thing worth talking about in itself, because it is not that easy to step into corporate world. I have to admit, there's a lot to learn compared to agency life. But from a workflow perspective, from a thought pattern perspective, it is fairly similar to what I do today. I'm always trying to think about, how do I gain the most insight about an area of development, an area of the business, to help the decision makers understand how the player thinks about it, what the opportunities are, what the unmet needs are. So it's a similar thing, but it's a lot more. It's a lot bigger in the gaming world versus the advertising world. In the advertising world, even on the biggest brands on the planet, I mean, I worked on Nissan, was the global brand strategist for Pepsi, the Mars pet food portfolio, out of all things, Activision at a time. And then back in Europe, it was Apple, PlayStation, Adidas, Mercedes, like really, really big brands. Even on those big brands, the strategist develops a strategy together with the creatives, briefs creative teams of, I don't know, 3 to 30 people, depending on the assignment. And then over here in video game world, your creatives are the studios, and those are dozens and hundreds of people in some cases. And the creative director on a game has an incredible responsibility to orchestrate all these people in the right direction. And I'm just aiming to help them make the right decisions along the way, and then build amazing games. Yeah, that's hope this answers it to a degree. I know it's a bit of a ramblecast answer for a Tuesday morning here, but that's kind of what I did in advertising, and that's what I do now, and it met quite well, actually.
Okay, so on a side note, how close is Mad Men to working in a real ad agency?
Well, funny you should ask. It Mad Men, I think, in my frank opinion, depicts a very specific flavor of advertising, which is the advertising culture in New York. I think they even and it was feeling a little bit too close to home. I never finished the show. Um, my wife and I started watching it, and I thought, this may be a little too close to home, and it kind of depicts the culture of advertising that I didn't want to be part of. And there was because in advertising, I think in most of business there is a distinct difference in flavor between the U.S. West Coast and the U.S. East Coast. I think that accounts for most types of businesses, and entertainment is out here, and in advertising is obviously very big in New York. Advertising and media is one of the big industries in New York. But Mad Men depicts that kind of flavor. It's a very intense, in my point of view, sometimes unnecessarily intense culture and elbow fight for best ideas, for the biggest office, for the corner office, for the who has lunch with whom kind of culture. And the West Coast advertising culture is very different. It we didn't feel quite represented by Mad Men. Out working out here on the West Coast in Los Angeles at Chiat Day, it was intense. It wasn't a job. It was a lifestyle. Let's face it. You work a lot, but I look at it back in very fond memories. And if I put my memories of the West Coast advertising culture next to how Mad Men depicts advertising culture, it's two very different things. And I'm very lucky that I experienced a version of the advertising culture that I can look back on fondly.
Yeah, plus I guess it depends on what, industry you're advertising for. I guess advertising for Coca-Cola and for games is a lot different to advertising for big tobacco as well. So if, I guess depending on what you're advertising for will, depend how accurate it is,
Oh,
to
yeah.
that. Plus, he was set, in a slightly different time. He wasn't set in modern time as well. So I guess certain things that they did then and they got away with, and kind of, the ethos around the office towards, people was different. So
Yeah, yeah,
I guess
definitely.
there's that element as well.
Yeah, and I was, funny that you mentioned the famous tobacco scene. It's toasted. I mean, not gonna lie, I've seen these scenes where stuff was made up on the fly in the moment, and it could actually be quite funny when it happens. I landed a couple of these actually when it's like you make something up in the meeting and everybody's like, "Oh God, that's it." So those moments certainly exist, but but in a fun kind of way. I was always lucky that I was never outside of soda, which I that was an interesting challenge to be honest. Never was kind of forced to work on a brand or a category that I had fundamental issues with. That helps. I think if you need to work on something where you fundamentally believe these people shouldn't exist, this product shouldn't be sold, that's a problem. And I was always able to secure a position on brands that I really adore. Apple, Adidas, PlayStation. PlayStation was magical. Like in the early 2000s, working on PlayStation was great, and even car brands like Mercedes or Nissan were fantastic. And there was always also a good amount of, and that led me to a hobby. It's also nice if you work in advertising agencies. I always keep telling people that, hey, if you're in an ad agency and either you gun for the top in this agency, and that's its own path, or in an agency that you jump around, you work your way up, or you go freelance at one point as a consultant, or you go client side, right? And if you have this, meaning going on the corporate side of things, and if you have that ambition to go corporate one day, you basically have to look at every assignment as a job interview. Everything you do lays out your path for the future. And in my case, that was really a lucky one because, well, not a lucky one. I mean, when I was assigned to the Activision business here in Los Angeles, it was super fun. It was Black Ops One. We ended up with an incredibly impactful commercial for Black Ops One at the time with Kobe Bryant and the soldier and all of us, and that was the time. I basically I threw myself at it with all my passion, and it was incredible fun and a lot of work, of course, a lot of stress, of course, but ultimately that was my job interview that got me into Activision. So and years later they called me and then hired me. So yeah, if you're in an ad agency and want to go corporate, every assignment is a job interview.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, what was your early work at, PlayStation? What was you specifically doing over there or for them?
Yeah, that was and again, to go back to one of your original questions, it wasn't always gaming. It wasn't gaming assignments kind of found me throughout my advertising career, or I found agencies with gaming potential, but I was never kind of an all gaming ad person. Yeah, so PlayStation was interesting. I was opening an agency for a German agency, Springer Jacobi. I opened their Amsterdam shop in 2003, built that up, and then was lured into Berlin. to join TBWA. There was a small office in Berlin that was created to take on European responsibilities for the network because Berlin was an interesting creative hotspot, and it certainly was. It was really a fascinating time to move to Berlin in 2005, and PlayStation was one of the network accounts, and it's it it's interesting at the time. You realize also that you you really need to know gaming and kind of have a it really helps to have a personal affinity with gaming to understand how to work on gaming brands. And I since gaming was always part of my private life, I always was the resident gamer in a culture that was either grown-ups or growing up people or people whose interest had evolved. Gaming wasn't as widespread even in the early 2000s in people that were 25 plus, and so I was often the resident gamer that then got pulled into the gaming assignment that was on the table. And at the time, the agency had worked for PlayStation Germany for a good amount of time while the main account was led out of London. But then, as the resident gamer shows up in Berlin, me, as the head of the strategy department there of that office, I was then quickly pulled into the European um, strategy development for. At the time, was exciting. It was just PSP and PS3 were on the horizon. That was kind of the starting assignment to contribute to. The ads were still made in London, but the strategy network that I was part of was then informing what was going to be done for PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Portable, while then I oversee the German portion of it in terms of how does it get activated and go out. But I was working very closely with the European strategy group, Sony in the UK. It's kind of funny. Some of the names are still there. Simon Rudder and people who were good partners back then. There's Sony's an interesting company. A lot of their people are still there, but yeah, that was the original assignment, PS3 and PSP. And I do remember I I went to Frankfurt where the Sony headquarters. We were in Berlin, and Sony PlayStation was in Frankfurt. We went to the PlayStation office on my one of my earliest visits, and the head of marketing, the CMO at the time, hands me a PSP for the first time, and I barely knew it was coming at that time. Nobody had seen it, and all of a sudden, I was in a conference room playing Ridge Racer on a PSP, and my head exploded. It's just the coolest thing on the planet. It's like, oh my god, I'm gonna help them market this thing. This is absolutely stunning. And they were their marketing team was known for being a bit selective in terms of who they let into the circle of trust. And it took me 5 minutes on Ridge Racer, and they saw the fire in my eyes, and they're like, okay, you can stay. And then it was a good start of a very, very cool relationship. I loved working with them. A lot of them, like when I didn't go to Gamescom this year, but very often when I go back for Gamescom, and a lot of those folks are still in the industry or even at Sony. And yeah, I have very fond memories of those PlayStation days. Sorry, Microsoft, I work for you now, but those PlayStation days were just a lot of fun. PlayStation, I mean, you grew up with it as well in the UK, right? I'm not sure if you grew up in the UK, but PlayStation was such an irreverent youth culture brand here in Europe. I think differently than in the US. I think the PAL region team out of the UK have created such an iconic youth culture brand throughout the 90s with PlayStation 1 and then through the generations, that it was just a lot of fun to work with them, for them, and have a lot of these experiences, because marketing on PlayStation was still a lot of events, and the early games comes in Leipzig. And I don't know, I remember we would always go to big Sony events that was just great parties, Rave on Snow, brought to you by Sony PlayStation. Okay, you had you got wristbands for every festival on the mainland because Sony was a sponsor of every youth culture event. It was glorious. I think we did good work for them, but it was also I remember getting a lot back because it was just a lot of fun. Getting my feet wet in actual video game business. That was my first business assignment in video games.
Oh yeah, no, I did grow up in the UK, born in the UK, and I remember growing up, with PlayStation and
Yeah,
Xbox. I mean, I feel like after 360 and beyond, it kind of got that culture to it, but definitely with the original one, it didn't have that sort of culture that PS1 and especially PS2 had. It was like, it was cool. It had the serious games like God of War. Then he
yeah.
had the more casual games, maybe for the kids, like Crash Bandicoot. Then he had obviously the Gran Turismos, the Need for
And
Speed,
SingStar.
like yeah, SingStar. Like it
You
had
know, they were going into all these kind of areas. It was
everything,
crazy. There
and
were
they were good.
karaoke nights at the agency every Friday because the new SingStar collection was there. It
And
was
all
really
these different
something.
peripherals as well, like the
Yeah,
guitars, the mics, like they tried with their, PlayStation iToy, I think it's called at the time, the
yeah,
camera,
it was.
and
Yeah,
you could like wash
exactly.
windows or whatever it was. And, obviously to see that turn into what it did in PlayStation I on PS3 with like the motion controls. And then ultimately, I guess that's some of the tech that formed the PlayStation VR 1 on PS4, and now the PS5 VR as well, to see where that went, where it started and where it's gone to. But yeah, it was always that cool system, and it was like
Yeah,
it was powerful enough that he was like, okay, it looks good. Initially it wasn't the most powerful, in PS2 era. Obviously, you had Xbox, you had obviously GameCube as well at the time, which was very powerful. But it was cool. I remember going to my family, cousins' houses, and they had like the multi tap. We would play wrestling with I don't know how many people,
yeah,
but loads of people, and not knowing really what was going on in the game, but it was just fun. Like it was just there was something to it. Yeah, it was such a cool sort of experience that I feel like Xbox didn't quite get. Like Xbox was like, okay, we got Halo, that is more. It kind of had a more serious, nature to it. And again, I love
yeah,
Halo, one of my favorite games. I like Gears of War, Forza, all those games. But yeah, it just hit differently on PlayStation, and
yeah,
it was kind of like a brand. They definitely went after that. Okay, this is a brand. This is cool. We're gonna get rappers. We're gonna get celebrities. They're talking about it. They're at the events, and it's a brand that's affordable.
yeah. No, it was fantastic. It was a great time. I mean, Xbox, on the other hand, they landed a lot harder and stronger here in the US with the 360.
Mm,
I think it's also a cultural thing. Doing a lot of research. I think the the network connectivity of the 360 was then in the US at least the next disruptor, right? I mean, the US culture is very much more defined by you do school, and then once you go to college, you leave your hometown. You uproot yourself, you go somewhere else. And I think the 360 and Halo and then Call of Duty played a big role in that. The 360 and its instant connectivity provided a significant benefit for these college dwellers. When we do research on people's early Call of Duty experiences, and the it's almost the bingo card is always that I played it in the dorm room, either online or with my friends, and that I think enabled the 360 to land really strongly here in the US. Also, obviously Microsoft being a US company and had a different ring here in the US, I think, than in Europe, because obviously in Europe, Sony was an entertainment giant as much as it was around the world. But Microsoft was just the company that brought you Windows. And then I think that had a different ring in the US than in Europe. But yeah, Europe definitely a PlayStation territory at the time. And frankly, being at the heart of it and being part of the marketing and the advertising and the culture that provided was just, yeah, thanks for bringing back those memories. There were some good moments there for sure.
oh yeah, some of those amazing games. But what I will say, what Microsoft did, like, yeah, they landed hard with the original Xbox, or like they landed pretty soft with the original. But then when with 360, even in the UK, I felt like there was a decade ahead of PlayStation. With the connectivity. Yes, it may not have been as powerful as PS3. Yes, it may not have had Uncharted on there, etc., etc. But Honestly, yeah, and also like the fact that you had to originally pay for Wi-Fi using that USB
Yeah.
dongle. They you had to purchase that was really expensive. I remember at the time because obviously I was a kid, I couldn't afford the dongle. I had in the same room that had the Xbox 360, there was a sofa, and around on the other side of the sofa, I had my computer, and that had obviously Wi-Fi on there. But I
Mm.
figured out on Windows XP, I believe it was, and then later, no, no, actually, it would have been Vista and then Windows 7, that I could share the Wi-Fi, the network coming in from the Wi-Fi through to the Ethernet because I wasn't using the Ethernet. So I grabbed a 50-meter, long cable. I didn't need 50 meters, but I just grabbed a huge long cable, connected it. It was around the sofa for years, and that's how my Xbox 360 had Wi-Fi. I was just sharing the internet from my PC. At the time,
Yeah.
obviously they later on put Wi-Fi in there, but yeah. But with the online aspect, they just nailed it. Like with PS3, I remember again, if I recall correctly, you couldn't at all or easily get into like a party where you're on another game, I'm on another game, our friend John is just watching Netflix or whatever it is at the time, and we're just talking. Like that wasn't
Yeah.
really a thing.
No.
Whereas on Xbox, that was just like we would turn it on. We would just all get onto the party and be like, "You want to play this? No, okay, we'll just stay on the party. You do your thing, I do my thing, and then we, seamlessly go and play the same game. We go and play, Call of Duty, or we play at the time. I remember it was Halo Reach,
Yeah.
or one of the other, great games, on the Xbox. It was, yeah, they definitely in terms of social connectivity, I feel like there was 10 years ahead, and they just uh, that is what made that console, sell. If they didn't have
Oh,
that,
totally.
it wouldn't have been. But they did, and the price was decent compared to PS3 as well.
Yeah, Xbox Live was an absolute revelation for gaming, and that's the strength of Microsoft, and obviously, um, they need to kind of flex that muscle in the future as well. It's like it's systems, backends. It's like that's where them being an operating system company can really come to play, and Xbox Live really nailed it for the time. And frankly, I mean, Xbox Live and the Xbox 360, as much as it was that big Halo moment, it was also the moment that it provided for Call of Duty. It was that breeding ground for a great online game. And when Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare came out in 2007, I want to say, yep, yeah, 2007, um, it was all of the sudden that existed, and we knew. I mean, remembering even going back in our own memories, my own memories of the time, how much online multiplayer games, shooters specifically, were restricted to the PC. The input logic, obviously, mouse and keyboard, and CS:GO or 1.6 at the time, and other online experience on PC, they were always kind of superior to the console experiences. And part of the PC being more naturally connected to the internet, the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2 didn't quite go there yet, and then obviously the input systems with mouse and keyboard. And it felt that the 360, more than the PlayStation 3, because of its Xbox Live and the connectivity, it was the first out of the box console that you can just plug into your Ethernet. And that really brought this FPS culture to console and then amplified it through its installed base, and the simplicity of use of a console to unseen heights. I mean, that was the start of Call of Duty, and that's when it became a thing on Xbox, and then it became the biggest thing on the planet on that whole generation and generations to follow. Yeah, so Xbox Live was really quite something at the time. Really, also fond memories of that time. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and having been at Activision for just over 8 years now, being in the ad agency, before that, you wasn't always based in the US. You came over from, Germany. What was it like over there? And what was that transition like? Going over to the US, changing your jobs, changing, where you lived, and somebody that is going through some transition like that. What sort of advice do you have for them?
Huh. Yeah. There for that, I'll rewind a second, a little bit further to my roots, and how I grew up in Germany. So yes, I'm to your point. I'm Germany. I'm Germany. I am the Germany. No, I'm not Germany. I'm German. Especially not these days. Everything's going south these days. I can barely read the news anymore. But I am born in Germany, in the north, and was born in Hanover, Germany, and my dad was an interesting fella. He was, on the one hand, kind of an engineer, physicist, nerd type. On the other hand, he was a surfer, and it's a windsurfer. We always, I remember growing up in my childhood years. Every Friday night, we would get into an RV, drive to the North Sea. The men would go windsurfing, and the women and the dog would sit on the beach and take care of children like me. It was all a very awesome time, by the way, sitting on the beaches of the North Sea, complaining about that island, that British island that takes away all the good waves. It was a good time. So I grew up partly in a very techie household, an engineering household, where everything needed to be an invention, everything needed to be crafted to perfection, and technology was very welcome. And then, on the other hand, we spend a lot of time on beaches, staring into the sunset, watching my dad surf. The water was way too cold, never liked it. But I think that combination, A, gave me access to gaming early because it was an accepted form of technology. We wouldn't have a VHS recorder for the most part of my childhood because my dad always thought that makes people stupid. So every time I wanted to watch Star Wars, I had to go to neighbors. But a Commodore 64 was absolutely in the card, with the hope that the son would start coding one day, which I didn't. I played a lot of summer games, and California
Funny, funny.
games. But yeah, so when you get your first Commodore 64, that was the biggest moment of my life. I got the Millennium Falcon, which I still have, a couple of years before that, and then the second biggest Christmas of all time was getting the Commodore 64, and not with the stupid cassette deck, but with the bread box of a floppy disk thing. It was just the best. And getting into that, and a lot of what literally got me here today was defined by the formative years. And I'm saying all of this because I think you asked me about what advice to give. I think making a transition like that, and I've seen people not enjoying a transition, like from one business to another, or from one country to another. I think it was all fueled by my upbringing and the early passions and things I enjoyed in life. It was like that surf culture on the beach paired with a very tech heavy culture that appreciated gaming as an entertainment art form over even watching a video recording, which was kind of an interesting combination. But I think that both fueled my path into gaming at one point. It always stayed with me from early Commodore 64 through the early consoles, and then through the obscure consoles. I mean, I had a Neo Geo with the original Viewpoint cartridge that I kind of figured out how to get on a swap market for games for little money, which was all kind of crazy. But all of that ultimately that enabled my dream to actually move to the West Coast. I think moving to California was always this kind of, yeah, it was a bit of a dream. Working in gaming was a bit of a dream. It never came together, but then all of a sudden the stars were aligning, and in 2008, when I was able to transfer from Berlin to LA, it felt like it meant to be, because it felt like a natural progression of where, it sounds cheesy, but where my heart would take me. That was kind of a natural thing. And I think that's important, right? If you make such a move, and I realized over the years it is quite a move from Berlin to Los Angeles, just the miles between these locations is insane. So before you consider such a move, I think you really want to make sure you have a really intrinsic enthusiasm for it. Don't do it just for the money. Don't do it for the resume. I think for me it was a big passion project, and that made it a lot easier. And I think it also helped that I kind of stayed a transferred within the agency. I was in TBWA Chiat Day Berlin, and then moved to Chiat Day here on the West Coast in LA. So I kind of kept my comfort zone to a degree, although here in LA it was all much bigger and much more famous, and it was a crazy environment to get into. But I think the passion really carried me. Moving in 2008 is also was a big moment, right? I mean, it was a big election coming, and we're like, okay, it's either McCain or that Obama guy, and we like Obama. So that was really a deciding factor when the election was decided. I'm like, okay, this opens my mind even further. And then it was one of the biggest economic crises of all times, and none of that mattered in that moment. It was really the enthusiasm for the job, for the location to move to, was really overcoming a lot of the obstacles, whether they were political nature or economical nature. We arrived here in LA literally with $0. Luckily, no debt, which is a big thing here in the US. Everybody seems to really have that debt here. But we started from scratch over here. And it was looking back at it, you kind of think, oh my God, what did we do? But I think you really want to make sure that your passion and your enthusiasm carries a move like that, because it helps to get through potential obstacles, like dealing with a city like LA. Moving here was very different. You know, you're from London. I came from Berlin. We never had a car in Europe. In Amsterdam, you had a bike. In Hamburg, you had a bike. In Berlin, you had the subway. You never even drove. Here in LA, everything is a car culture. It's a big shift. Making friends here is incredibly difficult because everything is so spread out. And but overall, it all came together really nicely. And I think the most important thing is that you do it out of enthusiasm with a passion that is then able to cut through every barrier, because it will throw a lot of you at you, whether it's immigration, whether it's the job itself, whether it's getting used to the fact that in America you are employed as long as your employer pays you. And that's kind of all the rights you have. It got a little better, especially in California, in terms of workers' rights and all that stuff. But coming out of a fairly protected Germany at the time, it was a bit scary to sign contracts that basically said, well, it's called at will employment. And when one side is not at will anymore, it can be over, can be beneficial for you, can be beneficial for us. But there's a lot of stuff that at face value seems scary, and you need that enthusiasm and that passion to cut through a lot of that. There's certainly a lot of that. But yeah, then we went from early visas to a green card, and by today we're happy dual citizens, trying to get the best of both worlds.
Okay, I mean, there's a lot, of information there. And I think, it's a lot of good advice. You gotta be, very certain, about that move. I know a lot of people make that move and they kind of hope for the best. For some of them, it, works out, but really having, the reason why, and if it's just for the sake of change, probably isn't always the best thing. Plus, also it depends where, in your life you are. If you're 20, not married, no kids, just coming out of university, is different to like a 45-year-old married, kids, mortgage, etc.,
Yeah,
etc. So yeah, like, that also matters as well. And also, if you have people there that, friends, family, people that you can. It's not just about money, but obviously if they can help with money, great. But if it's just a matter of showing you around, giving some advice. Or these, especially when it's a different country, even a different city, but
yeah,
especially a different country. These are the laws. These are the things that you shouldn't do or say. These are the places or the forms that you need to fill in, etc., etc. So you're kind of like, okay, I'm moving, but certain elements, the unknowns, are kind of taken care of, or I know someone
yeah.
that can just advise me instead of me thinking, am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely it helps to. I always try to keep a certain set of variables. When there's big change coming, I try to kind of secure my constants in the formula. So moving to LA, but it was then actually within a larger company that I liked and knew that they supported my move and my growth, and that helped, And then the jump from agency side to corporate side was a similar thing. I think my passion and enthusiasm for and understanding, my professional understanding of the gaming industry, that was kind of my anchor to muster the courage to go corporate side. And looking back at it, I'm not sure if I could have done that. At the time we moved to New York, we lived in LA for a couple of years. My wife and I, we were married when we came here. No kids, still no kids, enjoying a child-free life. But so that gave us the flexibility at one point to say, hey, we want to try new jobs and try a new city here in this country. And ultimately, when we got our green card, we had a little bit more liberty to move around. We moved to New York, picked up ad jobs there. But as mentioned earlier, I kind of got that, oh, shoot, this is the madman they were talking about. This is the madman that they were displaying. And literally, the agency I work for, I'll not name them, was actually kind of, well, part of that culture to a degree. It was is a big agency. They're really good, but it was kind of part of that New York culture. It didn't really gel with me, so I had a little bit of a motivation to start looking when Activision called and laid out the offer to move back to LA after 8 months to take the job in Santa Monica with Activision on the corporate side. And it was a big consideration because that's the other thing, coming from a smaller company or an agency and join a juggernaut of a business like Activision Blizzard at the time, that can be quite intimidating. And I think I'm not sure if I could have done it like, all right, I've got a great offer from an insurance company to do marketing there, or I've got a great offer from Procter and Gamble to do research there. It's just like, I think it's always a bit more beneficial if you have kind of that passion hook that gets you into a new environment, that motivation that carries you through the barriers. And in this case, it was really the passion for gaming that enabled me to not only get into, but sustain and thrive in that corporate culture, because it is different than an ad agency, for example. And it's always going to be different when you're coming from, especially when you're coming from smaller to bigger. I think the other way around as well. But whenever the context changes quite a bit, it will take a moment to get used to. And big companies like Activision Blizzard or Microsoft or EA probably have a different flavor profile, but also different opportunities than a company like an indie group like Annapurna or groups like that. So there's always a bit of a shift, but as long as you're really excited about the subject matter that you're going to work on and really believe in a product or a category, I think that's always really, really helpful to make a move. So, on the sidelines, if you're thinking about making a move into gaming, it really helps to be quite passionate about it. Not everybody has to be a hardcore gamer, but really embrace the art form as something that you believe in. That helps to understand how to run, to work the business of gaming from the inside.
100% agree with you there. So, as we approach the end of the podcast, today, one thing I always do with all my guests is like a rapid fire round of, I call them fun questions. I mean, the conversation's been pretty fun anyway, but I find these are even, more fun. Are you ready for them?
Sure, let's go.
Okay, so if was to leave Activision, go and start your own company or work at a another company, would you rather it be a small one or a big one? Like if you got a fresh start, so like a 10 person or like a 1,000 person company.
Oh, that's a big question. I think at the moment it would be another big one. Um, I think I've still got a lot of kind of big corporate years in me, but this idea of getting, and it's also an experience that it was quite a learning curve. That I'd like to exercise on if I ever leave. Now, look, here's the thing. Now that we're part of Microsoft, it is really an interesting proposition to figure out, is this my forever home? Because I love those two companies, and the path may actually be within this. But if it were to be outside, I think my next step would be another stop at the big ones. I think it's really intriguing to have that, especially when you're in a strategic research function, to have that a budget to do research. Smaller companies may not have that, and b have that strategic impact at a very high level is a very I think I personally find quite enriching. But ultimately, the step after that may be that, oh my God, let's get together with a small group of people to activate a passion project and try to turn that into a business. And either, we'll be super successful, or will be a nice experiment, and we'll retire with a little less money, or, make it really successful and break through. I don't know. But yeah, my next step, maybe another big one. There's something about corporate culture that, if done well, I find quite comforting.
Yeah, it definitely can be. I think one of the issues is like when you're younger, you might want to do the startup or the smaller company, but you want the stability, you want the money, you want that career progression, and you're going through that, and you just like Activision slash Xbox slash Microsoft is probably as big as it gets. Activision slash Xbox is probably as big as it gets in terms of gaming,
Yeah,
and Microsoft is as big as it gets in terms of companies. Yes, Steve. Apple, you got Facebooks, you got the Googles, but they're kind of just, horizontal to them in terms of like, I guess, global, scale. And in certain aspects, Microsoft is bigger, certain aspects, maybe, not, but like, it's as big as it, generally,
yeah,
gets. But, like saying, like the issue is, you progress, you earn more money. Obviously, that's a huge part of it. And then you get to, let's say, 50, 60 years old, you're thinking about retirement, but you're not, you still got a bit of gas in the tank, and you think, I want to, have a little stab at a smaller studio, whether it's starting in myself or,
yeah,
just working for a small studio. There's 10 of us. I know everyone's name. I know their dog's name. I know their kids, like all that. But then they just can't offer the money. They just can't offer the benefits. They just can't offer so many things that you're just like, oh, I've come accustomed to for the last 2 decades now. And they just can't,
yeah,
frankly, offer it, even though I kind of want to be part of that game where, I know that 20% of the game is like literally me, like instead of it being like a little tiny fraction, and there could have been somebody else that did it. So that's always a difficult one, and then I feel like as a result, a lot of people just get relegated into just sticking with the big boys because they get so used to everything that comes with working with one of the big boys. And part of it will be the reputation and the respect of, I'm sure if you say I work for Activision, then that goes a long way within the video game sector. And then if you say, oh, I work for Microsoft, that goes, I'm sure that gives people whiplash when they hear that, compared to if you just say I work for some studio that the average person hasn't heard of, that even though maybe per man hour put into the game earns more money and is better received, and is a very fun and enjoyable game, it's not this. It's like there's an element of that as well. So it's just like there's just
yeah.
certain things that the small studio just can't offer.
And you make an interesting point about, that it's also kind of, where are you in your career? What I mean, you're not supposed to talk about age in the business context, but obviously in the human context, age is a very real thing. And you definitely want to, I'm 50 now, and you definitely want to think about securing the future, to a good degree, before you feel, I mean, at least I feel comfortable enough to take a risk. I would like to know that I have reached a certain level of security, and outlook, and how, the work life could evolve, before I would take on, maybe a more risky, smaller project. It's like, you got to, at one point, with all the passion that you have for a category like gaming, or the job you're doing, there comes a time, and to your point, where you're not, you're 20, 30 years old anymore with full fire, at any given project, but really think about, okay, how do we land the plane here, and how do we want to retire? That becomes, unfortunately, a very real question that we all have to face at one point. And the question of what risk do I take from here on out is part of that. And not saying that big corporate life is risk free, quite the opposite, frankly. But it's definitely, yeah, well, again, it's a very personal consideration on how you look at your own future and what risk are you willing to take at what moment in time. And again, corporate life is by far not risk free, but it also has space for people with a more senior perspective, coming through a lot of experience, that are able to lead, inspire, and grow other people into it. Right? That's what a big corporate structure offers. There is room for leaders to grow other leaders in larger team sizes, and in just a overall more scalable environment, versus the 10 people studio, where I would probably love to be an individual contributor again, but it doesn't really allow you to nurture and grow talent. And frankly, that's something I grew quite fond of over the years, that you get to this point where you don't do your own projects anymore, in the sense that you run them, or you write the deck, or only you can write the deck. It took me a long time to actually force myself to not write the deck after my team has done a great job writing a deck. And now you reach a level in a career, I guess, where your main role is to lead other people. And I found that very um, compelling craft and passion as well. It's like, great leaders build other great leaders to really figure out how to make people grow, how to make people thrive, figure out what makes them be at their best, and then create an environment for them to thrive. It's like nowadays, back in the days, I was like, oh my God, look at this deck I wrote. It's an amazing deck. That was 10 years ago. And now I'm the other way. It's like, look at what my people, that look at the deck that Brandon built. It is incredible. It's beautiful. It's amazing, and it gives me that pride of ownership, that pride of leadership, in a sense that I help others grow, and that is something that I think. And again, I haven't worked in a 10 people studio, but I think helping others grow is something that is provided to you in a big corporate structure, if you play it right, if you do it right, if you prove to be a leader that can be trusted with that. But that gives me a lot of joy, frankly, and became a part of the new passion of the job, to see others get excited about what they do and really unfold their potential.
Oh yeah, for sure. And my next set of questions: favorite video game, favorite movie, and favorite board game.
Board game, probably relatively simple. I think it's Settlers of Catan. I don't play many board games, but that was one that kept showing up in the younger years, a lot in gaming circles. Settlers of Catan, I want to pin for um, board game. Favorite movie? Difficult, but I think, oh God, obviously now the franchises collide in my head a little bit, but it's probably Matrix One. Sorry, Star Wars. Yeah, Matrix One was an absolute mind blower. I remember I was in an early days ad agency engagement in Hamburg, Germany, and we got invited to this kind of secret premiere of the new Keanu Reeves movie, and I hadn't heard a thing about this movie. And I remember we all packed into a theater. I didn't even get a seat. I was sitting on the stairs. I remember that. It was crazy. And then we saw The Matrix unfold, and obviously a technical feat, but that whole idea of what is reality, that really stuck with me for a long time. So I think the movie that had the most profound impact in one moment in a scene was probably The Matrix. Although I have to say, Return of the Jedi is another one, because that was the first Star Wars I saw at a premiere in a theater with my dad and all of his surfer friends, and that was also a very defining moment. So Matrix, yes, but then closely followed by Jedi. Favorite game of all time? Oh goodness, that is obviously the hardest one. And I'm sure there is a good amount of recency bias involved, but Elden Ring is up there, I have to say. I think it's probably a little bit of a battle between um, Elden Ring, Mario 64, and Maniac Mansion. So Maniac Mansion, maybe let's start there. It was the last game I owned and played on my Commodore 64, and it was such a revelation going back to single player games, how storytelling can work in a video game. It was just absolutely fascinating. Lucas Magic back in the days. So that was a really strong one. Mario 64 was an interesting one. Back in the days, consoles weren't necessarily on shelves in department stores in Germany. And when you wanted to play the good ones, wanted to play a 60 hertz game on a you need a Japanese import, and we had a guy, we had a video game store that did all the imports, and got my N64 at Japan launch, which was before European launch. It was one of the most coveted objects in my days at the time. And I remember I was in college, and I didn't leave my room for 7 days. It's just like it was Mario all day long with pizza, and 120 stars later was one of the greatest experiences. And then yeah, Elden Ring is just it's just a game I think that took me to kind of to a place that I haven't really experienced before. It's such an incredible feature of game design, world design, intrigue, mystique, but then also gameplay at a level of excellence that is really hard to find these days. And obviously, it's the legacy of From Software built into this title in its most epic form. So I'm not sure if they're ever going to do a game of that scale again, and I'm not sure if another studio will ever be able to create this thing that From Software created. They created a category. They perfected it with Elden Ring, and I think yes, with some recency bias, but I think Elden Ring is definitely, I think, in the top three of games of all times. And then there's your GTA fives and your Cyberpunks, and obviously Call of Duty is an interesting one because it's such a staple. There's so many of them. We made 20 of them over the last 2 decades, and then some offshoots. Call of Duty is obviously this kind of ongoing frequency of favorite franchise. Maybe there's a differentiation of the question between a title and a franchise, and whether even though the title might be Elden Ring, franchise is probably Call of Duty. Yeah.
Okay, and final question, two parts. Does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you?
Oh goodness. In my grandpa's house, there were a lot of these kind of framed pearls of wisdom. It's like a little stitched picture or what grandparents had in their house. And there was a very defining um, kind of quote when it comes to money and wealth, which was always money doesn't make you happy, but I think loosely translated, it meant it buys you a piece of comfort. So it can calm you down. So money isn't a motivator, really. But again, going back to that conversation earlier, reaching a certain age and position and the just stage of life, money becomes a different consideration because you got to have to factor in. It's like, okay, how do I sustain this? And money is obviously needed for it. But I never really asked for money, which is a really weird thing to say. And also, I realized that incoming generations have to hustle very differently. I always worked for. We talked a lot about passion and enthusiasm. I worked a lot of out of passion and enthusiasm, and the money would follow. I also tend to throw myself into jobs at jobs with full force and all I've got, and I think that got rewarded over time. So it is not a primary motivator, and I don't come from money, so I don't have anything to fall back on. It's like my dad did well, and it's all well taken care of. But it's not that I'm sitting on something to fall back on. I had to create it myself. So it's important. I know that, but I also don't think of it as important too much, because also a happy life, I think, for me, really means I don't know. I'm really looking forward to a calm life. That at one point, I'm always just happy to. The happiest moments of my day in my life is just when my wife and I cook a meal each night. We cook each night, to kind of talk about the day. We don't have kids, so we really are. It's just us, and so cook a nice meal, watch a show, sit on the couch. As boring as that sounds, I think that's part of a happy life. Just that very small bubble, and friends. It's like we have a big friend circle. We were lucky enough to over the years build a big friend circle here in LA. We have a friend circle in Germany, and being with them, traveling with them. We all travel a lot together. That is definitely a part of it. But I do not aspire to luxuries. Frankly, they scare me in a way. When I see the this kind of weird I want to be a billionaire culture out there with a lot of the bling and the showing off of either true or false riches on the socials. That is repelling to me. I really don't associate with that. I really don't like luxury that much. We live fairly simple. And sure, we afford ourselves a nice hotel room when we travel, or I'm still not allowed to buy business class, although we technically could. It's just more a principle, that we will fly economy, even on long hauls. So yeah, I don't not really pull towards luxuries. I really like a simple life, even though we're having extravagant jobs and extravagant cities. But within that, I just like to come home and be with my wife, play some music. I still like to DJ a lot, and yeah, let's have a good time with friends. I like it simple, frankly. That's, I think, what it boils down to. I like it simple. I like it calm with occasional spikes of action, and we'll still like to work on these prestigious jobs and have a good time there. But life itself, I think, should be simple, and I hope we will be able to carry that forward.
And I think that's a great way to wrap up, today's episode of FireDEV. Okay, I want to thank you for coming on today, sharing your insights. Working at Activision, working at ad agencies before that. You're clear, passion and love for gaming, and obviously, your favorites as well within the, video games, video game movies and board games. So, okay, thank you very much.
Farhan, thank you so much for having me on the show. And yeah, you have a great day and keep doing what you're doing. I think it's a great thing to have a podcast like this to just exchange some notes across the industry, and maybe inspire some along the way. So thank you.
No problem. And, inspire people, document the journey for different people. Because, like, Activision's made it, or I guess, what, thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of people across all the different studios. Everyone has different journeys. And I, feel like it's a
Yeah.
shame not to have these conversations. So, again, I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone for tuning into this week's episode of FireDev. And I'll see everyone in next week's episode. Take care. Bye.